Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, A World Where Kindness is Currency, with Michelle Jones. We talk about how being content in the moment is a huge gift, how in helping others we can help ourselves, and watching Father of the Bride so many times.
Michelle is the founder and director of Kind Currency. She also owns a successful wedding consultancy and has had other businesses. She's a champion of kindness, a believer in the power of community, and an eternal optimist who is always smiling. As a Northeast entrepreneur, charity worker, and volunteer, Michelle was recently awarded with a Friendship Bench for her social impact work. She's incredibly resilient and describes herself as a chronic illness, mental health, and invisible disabilities warrior. Michelle is also an ambassador for inclusion, working with local and national movements such as Be Heard and Northern Power Women. Most importantly, she is also wife to Stephen and mum to Dylan and Isla.
Good morning to you, Michelle. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
We love the background.
Yes, nice and bright. Yes. I had a pair of school trousers on the radiator, I've got to add. I've just clocked those.
That way we know it's a real background and not one of the fake Zoom backgrounds. So.
I love the fake Zoom ones because anytime I turn around to look at James, I disappear when my face is not there. So, it's a fun game.
So let's go to our first question. When you were little, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yes and no. So I was one of those children that was quite curious, and I liked a variety of experiences and obviously quite nosy in terms of what people did. And although I found school very difficult, I also really enjoyed learning. It was just a lot more challenging for me. But from a very young age, I was influenced by a couple of events that actually led on to a career that I've got now. And those two events were being bridesmaid at a family member's wedding and the wedding of Fergie and Andrew.
Oh, wow.
The royal wedding, which was huge. I was around the age of 5 at the time, and these two events happened quite close together. And from that day forward, I become very interested in the world of weddings. And at the same time, obviously being the 80s, there seemed to be lots of films that focused on weddings as well. So all of these things sort of came together that sparked this interest in, for me, what seemed to be this sort of huge celebration, bringing people together. And I really liked that idea. And being quite creative, I would spend my days designing weddings. So I'd get my fashion wheel. Don't know if you remember the fashion.
I had one of them.
Yeah. You had one.
And I would design wedding outfits on that, and I would design my bouquets and things, and just had this real interest in the ability to create from the concept of a wedding. Obviously, I didn't realise there was a career, within that world until there was a very famous 80s film called Father of the Bride.
Loved it.
Yes, came. Yes. So I watched that film and was like, oh my God, I can do this as a job. This is unbelievable. And watched that film over and over and over again. And I did want to be from and absolutely loved it. But obviously, as you do with being young, still fascinated, and obviously all things that life sort of delivers to us. I also, in my sort of early teens.
Sorry, we need to close the window because we can hear dogs barking now.
Hold those, please.
Oh.
No. We try to get away with it, but it's like we're not.
Right.
Apologies.
Okay. It's
So
fine.
early teens.
Yes, so in my early teens, I also became interested in performing arts and really enjoyed as a young child as well, watching black and white musicals. And same as the wedding sort of films, it sort of took me into this like land, that provided so much creativity and so much colour, to life. That for me, actually, I'd really enjoy life if it was a musical every day. And people just sprang into songs.
Isn't it though? I think it's a musical.
And you had that high drama going throughout it. So the sort of the two creative industries really impacted me, within my learning and what I enjoyed every day. So I sort of followed this route through my education of obviously creative arts and being heavily involved, in my sort of out of school activities within the performing arts world, in school, getting involved in sort of different events that were on, being in the choir and things. And then my GCSEs, which is my son's just selected his, so it's brought back a lot of memories, like getting rid of everything that was deemed as academic and going and requesting, I know you're saying we've got to pick one of these, but I really want to do this and I don't want to do that, and picking creative subjects. So I felt like I really came into my own at that point, around the age of 14, where I've really got to focus on what I loved to do, not what I was being told to do. I previously said about how challenging school was for me. So I'd started school with a very significant hearing problem, which really impacted on my learning. So it'd been a real struggle to try and attain at those academic levels. I remember starting comprehensive school and did everything by age then, and I was 2 years behind everybody else, and that stuck with me, and I had to fight every step of the way, to sort of take ownership of my own learning so that I then would go on to achieve. So being able to select subjects at this point that were going to then allow me to focus on what I wanted to do was really, really exciting. And obviously I threw myself into it and knew that I was going to then go on to college and do sort of within that performing arts world. And I didn't want to go to college locally. I wanted to go to college out of town. I wanted to broaden my horizons. And I was very aspirational at that point. So I think all of that energy that I'd had to put into catching up with everybody else and then doing well developed this huge ambition within me, which I didn't really know what it was. I just had a thirst for learning and making a difference. I was getting involved in different things that I could. I remember when Comic Relief first hit the scene, and I was going into my primary school and saying to them, I want to put on a big show for Comic Relief, and they were like, right, okay. And this became a thing where something would happen and I was like, let's raise some money. And I want to do this. Can I do a big assembly performance and stuff? And so that whole side of me grew and grew, to the point that when I got to college and doing performing arts, I remember a lecturer saying to me, Michelle, you're very assertive.
I've got this picture of Rachel out of Glee. The bossy one.
And I just wanted to do everything, and be part of everything. And actually college was another turning point, because I love this whole world of creating something and performing in it. But then college showed a different side of the industry to me, which was the management of it. So I really invested in the arts management side. So I would take care of all that management work whilst we were developing performances. I then performing them as well. But I absolutely loved both sides of the obviously the industry, and that's where the wedding world came back quite significantly. I was able to put obviously everything together. We were designing costumes, designing sets, but making costumes, building sets, doing everything that I'd been doing when I was younger in terms of the world of weddings and creating these beautiful wedding days, that actually didn't see the light of day because it was just me doodling and drawing. So it sort of come full circle at that point. And I remember what my lecturer had taken me to one side and saying, Michelle, I know obviously at the moment everybody's applying for stage skills and things, but I want to show you a course that I've come across. And it said it's at university, so it's obviously a different route. There's not many universities doing it. It's a relatively new course, and it's not sort of on the radar at the moment. And it was an arts management course, which has then gone on to be named Arts and Event Management, and then it's Art Events and Festivals, which is a huge degree now. Every university does it. So there was this new opportunity presented to me. And this was at a time where I was getting work experience anywhere and everywhere within the industry that I could. And I'd just turn around to my parents at like the age of 16, 17 and say, I've got some experience in London, so I'm going to go down on my own on the train. And I've got a friend lives on the barge on the Thames. I'm going to go and stay with him. I'm going to go do this work experience. And my mum and dad were like, right, okay. And then I'd go to college and go, I'm going to be off for 2 weeks. I'm going to go and do this work experience that I've got. Really irritated, obviously, the performing arts lecturers, because I would just be like going off and do my own thing when I wanted. But that was my ambition at the time. That was driving me. So I obviously thought, right, okay, I can apply for university to do this course, and I can apply to obviously stage skills. Now I've got choices to make. But at that age, I was already experiencing quite significant health problems, and I was fighting with myself on a daily basis. So I had this part of my character that was very creative, very ambitious, wanted to go out there and, seize the opportunity that is life and what the world is. And then something was happening to me that I didn't understand, and I didn't want to understand it. And I'd done things like took myself to the doctors, at the age of sort of 15, 16, didn't tell anybody. I was dropping off like samples into hospitals without telling anybody. And it obviously got to the point where other people were starting to notice, that things weren't quite right. So I had these two worlds were colliding, and it was really, really, I'd say stressful, because it obviously was stressful, but I didn't know what stress was then, and anxiety driven. And I didn't know what that feeling was then, that there was a name for it. So at the point of me then going on to that next step and going to uni, it came at the point where my health was going to there was just going to be a huge landslide, and which obviously took me on the journey, what has been obviously the majority of my adult life. So I went off to uni, same, very ambitious, very assertive and eager to seize the opportunity. And I'd selected to do the arts management course, was very excited, by the opportunity that was going to present. And moved away from the Northeast. I'd always had this ambition of sort of going off and seeing other places, and so I didn't apply for any universities local. You know, it was very much, where can I do this course the furthest away like possible type of thing, but it's not going to be in the business school, it needs to be in the art school. So there was all these contributing factors. So I moved to Leicester, and obviously moved at a point where I had all these plans, but there was something else going to come along and just wipe the floor with everything. Do you know, it's always those things that you haven't got a clue what's around the corner. And although these illnesses and these symptoms had been sort of raising their head, it was at the point of being in that first year at uni that they really started to take hold. And that battle really began. And I managed to get through the first year. Fortunately for me, on the second night of freshers, I met the person who would become my husband. So I wasn't on my own, you know, and I'd sort of, by this point, I was like heavily under the hospital. You know, I had a consultant, you know, there was different things happening, and was still trying to, you know, to seize the opportunities of the day. And my second year at uni was a complete disaster. I couldn't get to lectures. You know, I couldn't function. I was just so poorly that like I couldn't live. I was just sort of trying to get through each day, but I wasn't getting through each day. You know, it was just absolutely horrific. I had all these horrendous physical symptoms, and which were starting to have a real significant impact on my mental health. And obviously this was like the late 90s. You know, there wasn't the conversations around mental health then. You know, in terms of dealing with physical illness, it wasn't something I was aware of. You know, I knew people that had passed away through getting really horrendous illnesses like cancer, like prematurely, but I didn't know anybody with long-term chronic illness. You know, so I was living with symptoms that frightened the life out of me because I didn't know what they were going to lead to, how to control them, how to manage them, what it meant for me as an individual. So I remember I had one day where I was not slept at all. I'd been in real serious pain. I was determined to get to my lecture. And on the way there, I felt like the world was splitting open. It's the only way I can describe it. And I arrived at my lecture and completely passed out. And I'd had a massive panic attack. And that day was like, I can remember it so vividly. And that day was pivotal to what then happened next. So I had to spend a lot of time in hospital, obviously learning to get to grips with what was happening. And I felt like my whole life got wiped from me. So I went from being this really aspirational person to overnight thinking I had no future. And I had to go through the process of trying to understand what was happening, whilst the doctors were trying to understand what was happening. Do you know? And I was being sent to different consultants all over the country for the physical illness. And then I was obviously being sent to see psychiatrists to help with the mental health, who turned around and said that I wouldn't have a mental health problem if it wasn't for the physical illnesses, and my mental health problem is never going to go away whilst I've got these symptoms, and left me. That was it. They sort of wrote back to sort of the gastro team and things that had referred me and said that there was nothing they could do. It was just one of those things. And that was horrific, because I was then stood thinking, well, if the doctors can't help me, what I don't understand like what's going to happen. And so I'd had to come out of university, so I didn't go on to do that third year. The university was brilliant, really supportive, kept my place open for me. Spent a year just trying to breathe. It was literally living each moment from the next. You know, there was no future. It was just like, I need to get through this next moment. And if I get through that moment, then I get through the next one and the next one and the next one. But I wasn't eating. I barely drank. I wasn't sleeping. You know, there was so much going on in my world. I was completely consumed by these illnesses. And I remember being at that day with the gastro team, still struggling to understand what was going on and pinpointing some of my symptoms to other departments, obviously me being referred to other specialists, and psychiatrists saying that, you know, you can't do anything. At this point, I'd not been out of the house for like, the only place I'd been is hospital in 8 months. I'd not been anywhere. I wouldn't even see anyone. I couldn't even handle people being in my space. I needed to be I couldn't sleep in a bed. I had to sleep on the floor. There was all of this. It was just awful. And like when I was younger, and I've realised that I had to take ownership of my learning situation and do something about it myself, I realised again that I was looking for other people to try and make me better. And like we're told, you know, doctors make you better. That's what you grew up believing. And I realised that I couldn't rely on these people around me to do what they were meant to do, you know, because they had all these unanswered questions themselves. Different treatments weren't working. Different treatments made me feel absolutely horrendous. And it was just one pivotal moment on one day where I thought, God, I've either going to live, I'm not going to live. You know, one path was going to take me down one route and there was only one end solution. The other path was going to be very, very challenging every day, but it was going to open up so much more life to me. And it wasn't, obviously, I say that as if it's like an overnight thing. It wasn't an overnight thing. It was a realisation that then took me probably about 10 years to get to where I am, obviously, now. But I thought, right, what do I want to achieve? And I thought the one thing I do want to achieve, I want to get back to university. I want to get back. I'm not bothered about the whole social thing. I'm not bothered about getting loads of experience. Just want to get back and finish that course that I started, because I'm a big believer in that. If you start something, unless it's causing like you pain or anything like that, then see it through. There's always lessons. Don't like sort of go, I'm not doing it anymore if it becomes too hard. You know, it's one of those things that you plow through. So I thought, right, my focus needs to be finishing that degree, but I need to get back to Leicester. And to get back to the Leicester, I've got to get over the doorstep, you know, and I've got to then get to the end of the path, then to the end of the road. You know, so I took these small steps every day, and it was horrendous. You know, some days they just didn't happen at all. Some days I just didn't get out of the bathroom. You know, some days I just would stand there, you know, and nothing would happen. But eventually, obviously, with each little step forward, I got stronger, and I did get back to uni. And it was harder looking back than I appreciated at the time, you know, and I need to give myself real credit, because I'd sit in a 3-hour lecture, and for that 3 hours I'd be in a state of panic for the entire lecture. You know, I'd be obviously drugged up, you know, with medication from the hospital, which obviously has different effects on me. And to get to that lecture, I'd have had to get myself up and ready and deal with all my symptoms and enable myself to get there. And then obviously I'd go home and I'd just work on my work. And a friend had said to me, who I'd lived with in the first year and obviously remained good friends with, he was managing the student radio, and he was like, I really want you to be involved in it. So I was like, right, okay, I'll do it. So he was like, I want you to have the Saturday night club night, sort of the warm up for the big student night out. And I thought, right, okay, I can do the pre-show and then I can just like go back home. So that gave me something extra, to work on, something that I was doing that actually was for me, was a little bit part of my old world that I'd had. And I was really grateful he'd said to me, I want you to do this, and I want you to be part of it. And you can, and it meant that obviously I had to go out there and plan the whole show. I had to work with people that didn't know me and obviously put this show on and be full of life, and then obviously come away from it and still obviously be able to go, right, I did a good job there. And it managing the two things was getting me through every day, getting to my course. Every lecture that I got to was a tick and stuff. And whilst everybody else was planning for what they were going to do once they'd left university, from being someone who was really aspirational about the future and was like, oh, I'm going to go and see the world, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. They were all planning for the future, and I was just planning to get through the next day. So that at that point was just what my world was. And obviously I was living with my now husband, who was my boyfriend at the time. And obviously he was planning on what he was going to do when he left. And so I started to look at, obviously, what had I wanted to do? And obviously one of the big things I'd always thought after uni, or if I'd gone to stage gear, I'd be living in London. After uni, I'd go to London. I'd loved London. I got my work experiences that I'd sort of got and went down on my own down there. And I was like, so let's do that. Let's look for employment in London. And because that was something I really wanted to do. And so we moved to London, after graduating, and I didn't have any plans at that point because I was still heavily under the hospital, declaring your medical records when you've literally just come out of university, so you've got very little experience, is not a great thing. So I was applying for jobs and getting lots of rejections. I was applying for jobs within the arts world, and there was just rejection after rejection. Unfortunately, Steve was in employment, which was helpful. And then when we just moved down there, so like September the 11th happened, and loads of funding projects got their funds pulled. It had this real damaging effect. I don't think that people realised happened in this country. That actually it was going to have a knock-on effect in tourism and what that meant, and which sectors were going to feel the impact of that act of terrorism. So I started to get offers of being able to sort of do things voluntary. I thought, well, I've got to do something. I've got to keep my hand in and do this. And where we lived, Cameron McIntosh's stage school was just down the road as well. So I thought, right, I'm going to enroll there and do a musical theatre course. And this was me still trying to embed myself back into normal life, still not fully diagnosed with all the conditions that I was going to have to contend with. And then obviously was trying to still work through every day, feeling significant poorly, like very, very poorly, and still being in a state of anxiety and panic because of my symptoms every day. And we had 2 years in London, and for the full 2 years, I just felt like I was in and out of hospital, nothing, like still was in that mindset of I don't have a life, I'm not going to have a life. I was trying to keep my hand in within sort of the sector that I wanted to work in. And I'd found employment, but not in what I wanted to do, but actually employment that gave me so many skills that I absolutely appreciate today, because it was about managing people. It was in a personnel department, and which is obviously human resources now, but my role was very hands-on, and I looked after some quite sensitive cases in this role, where to really protect and care for individuals and help them go through what they were going through. And I think because I was going through that journey myself, I was able to bring a lot of that to that role. And I had these few years where I really learned how to help people, how to support them, and look after their needs. And actually that looking after their needs got me to work every day. So whereas if I might get up and I might be significantly poorly, or I might not have gone to sleep and being really poorly through the night, rather than me going, I'll just be off today because I can't cope with how ill I've been, I'd be like, oh no, I need to go in because this is happening today. This person's going to need me. I need to work through this. And so I would go in, and people would say, you need to go home. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'll get through. So I started through that employment to understand people, but also understand that when I was helping people, it brought me so much strength to manage my own health problems. And obviously, like, science moves on. So with every sort of year, your medication gets better. You get a different diagnosis for something. So you're starting to get a bit of a sort of a better management around your conditions. And so because life was still very challenging in London, and I was still needing, obviously, some balance in my life to be able to manage, we also wanted to move on with our life and settle down. We moved from London. We didn't know where at the time. We sort of picked different locations and applied for jobs there, and best job came up in Newcastle.
Yay.
So which was obviously, now it was the best decision we've ever made. So we moved to Newcastle, and that was a real pivotal decision, because that move here brought so much to my life that, like, looking back, I don't think I would have moved on from where I was if I hadn't have done that. The doctors I ended up under, were unreal, absolutely unreal. And I've got to say, when you're managing chronic illness, if you haven't got the right care from a professional sense around you, it is impossible. The minute you get the right level of support from the people around you, you're not battling alone. You're battling with a team of people that all share the purpose to make you well or live like a well person. So that was real key. I had an excellent team that understood and wanted to help me to, get on top of these illnesses, learn to manage them, put systems in place. So that was really significant. I also started to think about the future, not just from a personal perspective, but what if I can have a life beyond just trying to manage these conditions? They're all consuming, but what if I could obviously open this world up, which is, funny enough, actually moving to Newcastle at the time was the same time a lot of investment started to come into the region, the quayside development and things. Mm-hmm. So lots of funding came into play. Events started to raise their head. So I was getting involved in different things that were happening. And I took a job again within personnel, because I needed that ability to help people. And that then opened opportunities for me to then help people on a voluntary perspective as well. So I started to sort of get involved in that third sector through events, through work. And obviously started to sort of help people, plan their weddings, and that aspiration was still obviously at the back of my mind. And I had also had the hospital saying to me, because one of my conditions prevents you from being able to have children. So they were like, really, like, you're probably going to have IVF, but if you want to have a family, you've got to do it sooner rather than later. So other people were making decisions for me at that point. Sorry. And thought, right, okay, that's another big decision I need to make. So I'd got this well balanced where, sorry, my throat's going funny.
You need to get a glass of water.
No, I'm okay, it's fine. So I'd managed to find this balance in my life where my illnesses were still really difficult to manage, and I was still constantly living in this state of anxiety. But I was helping people through a voluntary perspective and through work. I was also doing events. And then myself and my husband drove a lot of aspiration into flipping properties. So which for me was a brilliant use of my skills, because I was getting to put on a show, so to speak. So we'd buy these properties that needed absolute ripping apart and then put them back together, and then we'd sell them on. And so I had a lot going on in my life. So I felt like, oh, I'm living, now we'd got back into sort of socializing. And at this point, I was like, right, but I want to have a family. And I'm being told that I need to do it now. So we got married, and then this big decision had been made that, right, it has to be now. And which I think would never have happened on my old path. I probably would have been somewhere off in the world and would have probably thought about kids at the point where it would have been all panic stations because I'd left it too late, so to speak. But here I was in my late 20s being told it needs to be now. Otherwise, it's never going to be an option. Obviously, I'd had the conversation with Steve well before we'd got married in terms of saying, what will we do if it doesn't happen? We're like, well, obviously we want children, and there's lots of children here in the world who need love. But we ended up having our first child, which was a massive shock because nobody thought it was going to happen. In my head, I was like, oh, it's not going to happen. Everybody was like, it's not going to happen, and it's just one of those things. I sort of got used to that idea. So when it did happen, I think I didn't talk for about 3 months. I was just in a state of shock, but that came with other problems because it was then straight into an obstetrician. How am I going to, you can't take this medication, you can't take that medication. I was very poorly in that pregnancy, just because just trying to, again, manage my illnesses around what needed to happen. So getting to work was a problem, and I spent that whole pregnancy just trying to get through it again. And then obviously this life appeared and it needed looking after. And me and my husband, who had sort of resigned ourselves to the fact that it was going to be a real challenge in terms of what having a family would be like for us, then had this little bundle that needed to be cared for. And I always remember my sister will say, I've never seen shell shock like it in my whole life. When she came the day I got home, she drove up and came, and obviously then she left, and she was like, that whole thing of being left. And that was another, again, pivotal point for me in terms of managing my illnesses, because I was then very much, well, it can impact me in my life, but I don't want them impacting this child's life, like his life is so much more than my illnesses. And so I obviously threw myself into being a mum. So I resigned. I flipped the last property and was like, I'm going to fully concentrate on being a mum. If I'm going to be really poorly as well, I'm going to concentrate on being a mum. So I did things like throwing up over the top of the baby whilst I was breastfeeding, in terms of being really stubborn and going, this is what I'm going to do. You know, I'm not going to let my illnesses impact any of this journey, you know, and to the point now my kids have to be reminded, you know, mum's not well and stuff like that. I've sort of, for me, that's a huge thing, because like, why are you going for an operation? And it's like, well, because, you know, and they're like, oh yeah. So that's like a big thing for me. So the world that I then entered in this sort of mummy and baby world then started to open up doors to this world of helping people. So that voluntary work that I'd been doing then became a huge part of my life. And I was still had been doing events when I obviously could, and I helped people get married, but I was absolutely sort of addicted to being able to help other people, and I was helping myself at the same time, because I was just getting stronger and stronger with each bit. So, and being heavily invested in my local community brought me so much joy, you know, in that whole concept of actually community living is the way forward. You know, problems aren't problems. You know, I'd spent 10 years living a problem on my own, and actually I didn't need to do that, you know, and I was seeing other people around me who were facing their challenges but with support. And so I completely engrossed myself in that sort of community side of life, and then that gave me the sort of strength to say, right, well, and by this point Dylan's only 6 months, and I'm like, well, I want to go back to earning. Do you know, this whole thing of me going, I'm going to resign and leave everything. So I thought, what can I do? I'll not think about anything that I've done all these years, and I'll just do something completely new. So I thought I'll do childminding. That'll work brilliantly around having a baby. So I went and did the courses that you needed to do, set up the business and things, started doing it, and I loved it, you know, because I got to be creative all day, you know, with these little people. You know, it was like performing all the time, singing and dancing. Absolutely loved it. Every day I had to get up and go out. I had to leave the front door to, you know, get them to activities, get them socialising with other children, you know. So every day, twice a day, we were out and about doing activities. Walking's one of the hardest things for me to do. So it was like pushing these double push chairs, you know, to these activities. So I found myself starting to see the person that I'd been before, and I was still getting diagnosed with new conditions at this point, and I had this childminding business. I was doing the voluntary work, you know, I was being a stay-at-home mom, and I was really sort of into it, and I could start to feel that fight come back, not just the fight to battle the illnesses that I was experiencing, but to live a really full life, you know, so a life of sort of with chronic illness rather than life of chronic illness, you know, which that's what I'd been doing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, right, I'm going to throw myself into this, and was loving it. And then a lovely lady who was helping me set up the childminding business through PNE, who I'd been introduced to through the Prince's Trust. So the Prince's Trust was also helping me. Said to me, Michelle, why aren't you doing what you've wanted to do all these years, and what you've trained to do, and what you've invested your time in doing, you know, got lots of work experience in? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And she went, well, if I asked you now today, like, what would you love to do? Like, if you hadn't have had all of this illness to deal with, what would you have done? And I said, oh, I'd set up a big wedding planning company. And she was like, well, why don't you do it? So we were stood in my kitchen because I couldn't go into town at this point on my own. I could get into town with my husband, but I couldn't get into the city on my own. Like, my agoraphobia was too much. So she'd come to my house rather than me having to go into Newcastle city centre. We stood in my kitchen and I was like, no, I can't. And she was like, but yes, you can. And hearing it from somebody else, and I wanted to say but. Every time I went to say but, she gave me a reason why that but shouldn't be there. So I remember I leaving, and I remember being just stood in the kitchen in a state of shock and thinking, I'm going to do this. And that was the shock. It was me giving myself the opportunity to say, well, actually, in the past sort of 10 years, you've gone from this to this. And so this is monumental because you're going to actually now focus on something that you'd wanted to do before we became poorly. So this is part of your old world. So I set up the wedding planning business and was really lucky. My networking at the time were mother and baby groups, and they brought so much work my way, and I ended up then becoming friends with the owner of a stately home that inherited it. So I then supported them on making this huge, massive, exclusive venue, within the region, which was an amazing experience. And I was then taking on more and more community and voluntary work. So I had people who needed me. There was lots of people in my life that needed me, and that helped me massively. And obviously went on to have a second child, went on to planning some of the biggest weddings, some of the highest profile weddings in the UK, and helping obviously venues achieve sort of that very high-end exclusive service. And then my focus shifted, and it shifted to that real need to make an impact. So the impact that I've managed to create in my own world, I wanted to pay that forward. And so my charity and voluntary work became very much my focus. And in 2016, the ethos of my charity work clashed massively with my wedding industry work. So I'd had some difficult situations that exposed a side of the industry that I really struggled with. And I thought, I can't be in this sector of the industry. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't make me feel right. I remember this evening I'd come out of a meeting where we desperately needed funds to resolve an issue. And this was people's lives that were at rock bottom, and they really needed support. And there was nothing there. And it was like, how are we going to solve this? To then getting in my car and driving to a wedding meeting, where there was vast amount of money that would be wasted, and attitudes around that money. And I couldn't handle it. I was just like, this isn't right. There's an imbalance in the world, and there's an imbalance in my life. So I set about changing the wedding planning business to align itself with that, the sort of the giving side of my life. So I moved my focus from that high-end opportunity through to enterprise work, and obviously supporting social enterprises and community spaces on achieving additional revenue of incomes through weddings and events, supporting them to deliver their purpose and sustaining their purpose by allowing them to access, additional funds. And I also plan weddings for people still. I'm very picky. So I only plan a handful of weddings a year, but they've got the chemistry needs to be there. They've got to align with my personal ethos. They've got to want to plan a wedding because it's about the celebration of the two people coming together, the families uniting in love, and what that means, and have whys for things, and not just because I can, or and stuff. So I aligned the business at that point, so I felt more comfortable within that sector. Because at one point I did think I'm just going to move away from the wedding world, because I didn't like where I was with it. But I've managed to realign it, and so I could continue. I was approached at this moment in time by a national charity to give my wedding planning services to them. So that for me was really significant, and that gives me so much joy that I can support people at the worst time in their life achieve something beautiful. And again, this focus around my charity work was still driving me. That was getting me up on a morning, obviously, as well as being a mum. The whole family had got involved within the third sector. We were all doing our bit. And then I obviously identified there was an imbalance within my world. And then I was obviously working on closing gaps of disadvantage in some of my social impact work, but could understand that there was quite significant gaps across the whole of society. And that thought then became ingrained in my mind of, I don't like this. I don't like the fact there's such significant imbalance. Everybody deserves to lead a fair, kind life. It's not fair that you've got really lovely people who are really struggling. So my chronic illnesses and my charity work, and now obviously in my business life, I was constantly coming across people who were giving every single day. And like me, obviously faced significant adversity. But like I'd experienced, there was nowhere really to go for some support. You could embed yourself within your local community, and that gives you so much strength, but actually giving you a step up and a helping hand to move you forward and access opportunities, that's not available. And I was like, well, we can do something about this. We've got to be able to do something about it. And within one of my roles, it's governance within education, I focus on inclusion and disadvantaged children. So I obviously, as a critical friend, challenge and monitor the pupil premium pot of money in schools. And but at the age of 16, obviously that pot of money that's accounted to your head for being disadvantaged disappears. So as adults, there's nothing like that. And I was like, right, I need to create a pot of money because I want to do a number of things with it. I want to, one, help people close the disadvantage gap to help them live a fairer and kinder life. And I also want to give thanks and pay forward that kindness that they've shared back to them, and provide that gratitude that they deserve. So I was like, I need a pot of money to do this. How am I going to do it? And obviously from that thought, kind currency bloomed, and so for me, that whole journey from being very aspirational and creative, and then being stopped in my tracks, so to speak, that path of dealing with chronic illness was the path I was meant to take. I was meant to be completely steered in a different direction, and new doors opened to me that I probably would never have come across on the other journey, and being able to help people and understand that if I help them, I help myself at the same time. Whilst they're getting stronger, I'm getting stronger, was really, really significant. And then obviously having my kids at the age I did, they've come on this journey with me as well. So I've learned so much from them, and they're very much behind kind currency. It's at the minute, it's them that I'm saying, what do you think of this? Do you think this will work and that will work? And do you understand this? And because they've grown up in this world that myself and my husband have created, that you can have challenges that don't need to be a barrier. We can find the opportunities to be able to then get through each day and move on. And we can find those opportunities whilst we're supporting other people and helping other people to overcome their challenges. And so they're heavily invested in it too. And for me, it's sort of it's coming full circle at the minute. Like, I turned 40 a couple of years ago, and I think that it was also the anniversary of the 20 years since I hit rock bottom. And I give myself the opportunity to say, right, it's now time for you to totally embrace those aspirations you once used to have and hold, and not have to direct them into just battling through every day. You're going to be poorly. I'm waiting for a massive operation at the moment, which obviously has been delayed because of COVID, but it's really significant, and each day it's delayed further, the poorlier I get. So it's needed. I understand all of that now, but I can now take all of that energy and all of those lessons learned and actually plough them into something that I hope is going to make a massive difference to a lot of people, on lots of levels, and have lots of laid impact. So I felt like that was another point where I turned 40. It was a significant anniversary, but it was a bit of a coming of age for me as well, and saying, like, you've done all your learning, and now you're going to be able to do something with it. You've got the strength to do that, and it, even though most days feel like I don't, I've got to say that, because it's not easy. Every day is a challenge. I feel like a fraud. I feel like I'm not the right person to be delivering this. I struggle every day. My illnesses make me struggle every day. Even just sometimes speaking can be really difficult. But I've got to the point where I'm like, right, it's now or never. I've got one life, and I can either be the person I was meant to be and go and do this, or I don't. And I've got this sort of mantra where I'm like, if I'm on my deathbed, what do I want my lasting thoughts to be? Do I want them to be a what if? Or do I want to go, God, you tried, you might have fell on your face, but you tried. And that for me is really important. And it's been the mantra that's helped me get through with the chronic illnesses. It's like, every day, just try. If you don't succeed, it doesn't matter. If you're having a bad day and you don't get out of the house, or you don't achieve what you wanted to achieve, or you've had to, I call it giving in. It's not giving in, but for me, it feels like it. If I've not managed to sort of get through that day because I've been too unwell, it's at least I've tried, so that's what I'm doing now with kind currency. I'm trying, and I'm not just trying for just one reason, not just to get through the day with chronic illness. I'm trying because I want to make a difference to other people.
It's very powerful. There's a definite theme. If you think about the working in personnel, helping others, having a child, helping others, and each of these experiences giving you that strength, that energy to keep going, to keep trying, and then making a difference. And I think all that becomes, it's almost like your rocket fuel, isn't it? And I think it's we talk a lot about managing energy, and I suppose if you've not managed to do as much on one day, I guess, do you look at it as, well, tomorrow's a new day and we'll see how I feel tomorrow. But I like this idea of you live in the present, which we're all taught we should be doing anyway. Thought for the day there. We all live too far in the future or in the past, and we should live in the day, in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's possibly when you've got invisible disabilities, you have that as a bit of an advantage. You have to live within the moment. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to manage what potentially is going to happen to your body around different situations. So, and it is very much, we're brilliant planners. We've got a plan, risk assessors, excellent at risk assessing the situation, because everything needs to be thought out and delivered. But within the moment, all of that needs to be actioned, implemented to ensure that it happens. Mm-hmm. And obviously so it's like that reactive alongside being proactive. So, it is a skill that I've definitely learned because of managing the situation with my health. I was lived in a world of throwing myself at everything when I was younger, without thinking about anything at all. Completely different, to what the life I've got now. Then I had spontaneity in my life. I don't have spontaneity in my life now. It's just not a possibility, but actually I'm fine, because being content in the moment for me is a huge gift, and that's what I like to say, right? I take each day as it comes, each moment as it comes. If I have a bad morning, it doesn't mean that the afternoon is going to be bad. It could be that the evening is full of energy and is really enjoyable, and I get to work through lots of things. So it is very much of, I don't know how each day is going to be. I am dependent on what my body's going to react to, but it's just living with it, and then being able to, well, right, that's okay. Let's just deal with this now, and then we can do this later.
Great advice.
Very much so.
For most people, I would say as well, Michelle. Okay. Should we massively lower the tone and go to the quick fire question round?
Yes.
So, for our listeners, we actually had a list of questions and let Michelle choose. We choose the number, so she doesn't yet. So that was quite fun.
So question number 1, where is the most relaxing place you have ever been?
The most relaxing place. This is a very mum response, but it goes back to being present in the moment. In the middle of the night, when you're feeding your baby, you're the only two that exist. And in those moments, the level of contentment I used to feel was unreal. And the contentment brought such a stillness, within my world, that it was the most serene moment, and I have moments now, because my kids are very noisy now, that I can take myself back, where obviously when you're meditating and things, people say take yourself back to that relaxing time, whether you're on a beach or something like that. But it's the dead of the night, when it was just me and this tiny, tiny little life. And it was as if we were the only people that existed in the world. So for me, that is my sort of relaxed place that I take myself back to in my mind's eye.
A great answer.
Oh, cool. So I'm going off piece because I think there's a better question that James decided. Number 6. So if kind currency was a cake, what flavour would it be?
It would be like a Willy Wonka cake, and with every mouthful, you'd taste something different.
Wow.
I wish that existed in real life.
I know. In one mouthful, it'd be gooey, and then the next mouthful, it would, those little crackly sweets that go up in your mouth. So you'd have a different experience with each mouthful. And you'd be so eager to share it with people. You'd just be giving it out, so it would be so moreish that you just want to give it out, and it could never all be eaten. There was always just more and more to share.
It's a bit like Mary Poppins medicine.
I know.
The flavour keeps changing. That'd be brilliant. I'll have to have a word with someone.
Yep.
See if we can get one of those made. And question 3, what annoys you about the modern world?
Oh.
Is it the second podcast?
Yeah.
I get very, very upset when people don't think about how their actions will impact another person. Mm-hmm. So fine if it's going to have a positive impact, but from my experience, on the whole, people will make decisions based on their own needs that have a very negative impact on other people. And I think that that's in all walks of life. I think we've seen it played out recently over the weekend, especially with the government, in terms of what we say and do. And our actions are where we deliver impact. That's the thing that makes the difference. And I get upset when people don't realise that they've got control of whether that action has a good or a bad outcome. I really annoy my kids because I'm always saying to them, it's actions, not words. And don't forget, if you do that, it's going to have a consequence. You might not feel it, but somebody else will. And they're always like, harm. I'm like, oh, it's true. It's something I try to instill in them, and I'm very mindful of my own actions. My own actions have an incredible impact on myself if I don't make the right decisions, and what my actions have on the outside world. So yeah, the thing that upsets me most is people not appreciating that their actions have a direct impact on others.
Mm.
Thank you.
I'm sure the kids will look back and be like, she was right, when you're an old granny. She was right, Mum, wasn't she? Yeah. She's a wise old woman.
So funny. Okie dokie. So the question we ask everybody, if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give to you?
That's quite an emotional question for me. At the age of 18, I was on the cusp of my world at the time falling apart and losing everything that I knew and that I thought was going to be my future. And I was petrified beyond anything, that I'd ever thought I'd experienced. I never thought I'd experienced the fear that I was feeling then, and obviously then went on to feel. So if I could go back in time, I'd want to hold my hand, and I want to provide the strength and just say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be hard. This isn't going to be easy. And there's going to be incredible adversity and challenge that you're going to face. But it is going to be okay. you're not going to live the life you thought you were going to live. And that's fine too, because you're going to experience life with a completely different outlook, through a different set of eyes. You're going to feel it, genuinely feel it, and you're going to be grateful for the lessons that you're going to be delivered through this journey. It's not going to be easy for a long time, and it's never going to be easy. But eventually you'll get to the point where you'll make peace with being poorly, being ill, and you will make a life that you absolutely adore and that you wouldn't change for the world.
Wow.
she's struck us dumb.
Deserves some silence.
Yes, it did.
Just to reflect. So for our listeners, if you would like to follow Michelle and Kind Currency, a couple of places to check out. Look for Kind Currency on Instagram or on LinkedIn. Search for Michelle Jones, or the URL is Shell's Kind World. Well, we're really thrilled you've come on the podcast to share your journey with us, Michelle. It's been lovely to hear. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.